You're a content creator and you just signed with an influencer talent management agency. You've totally made it, right? Actually, getting signed is not the flex you think it is. In fact, it's possible you just made the worst mistake of your entire career. In this episode, we're talking about the things that nobody tells you about influencer managers. Welcome to Small Steps, Big Moves, the podcast about the business of influence and content creation. My name is Carmen Sognonvi, and I've been a creator since 2016, primarily in the field of luxury family travel. And even as a small to mid-sized creator, I've been able to generate six figures in revenue from paid travel and brand deals every single year since 2018. So to me, the business side of this profession is just as much fun as the creative side.
Hi, I'm Giovanna Gatto, and I'm a freelance video editor and content creator in the food and travel space. I primarily work with small businesses and other content creators, and I've been watching YouTube since before I could ride a bike. But now that I work professionally in this space, I've really enjoyed being able to take a peek behind the scenes and see how this business truly works. Now, the focus of this episode is influencer managers and what no one is telling you. So, Carmen, what's the tea?
So the tea is your money is not safe. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, just in the last 12 months, there have been so many stories about influencers getting scammed by their agencies. You know, there's so many examples. I had to write it down. So let me refer to my notes. One very prominent example is Ethan Klein. He's a huge YouTuber, right? His podcast is called H3. And his agency called BBTV, he claims they stole over $600,000 from him. And I believe they've kind of worked it out now, but it got so bad that it went public. Another example, Theo Vaughn, who's a comedian and has a very popular podcast. Him and a bunch of other podcasters were all signed to this agency called Cast Media. And these podcasters accused Cast of stealing over $4 million in earnings from all of them together, allegedly. And then another particularly egregious example was an agency called Carter Agency. And what's particularly sort of insidious about this company is that they allegedly systematically targeted Black female creators. And what they would do is they would represent the influencer and they would sort of sell their services to the brand. They would charge the brand, let's say, $10K for a campaign. They would tell the influencer that the fee was only $5K, and they would pocket the difference. And this blew up into a pretty huge story. All of these, female creators coming forward. And those are just a few examples. And I think one thing we have to keep in mind is that these are only the stories that went public, right? Like a lot of times when this stuff happens, creators don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing. So there's probably way more examples of these kinds of scams that we just never hear about because nobody wants to go public, or they're kind of negotiating behind closed doors to kind of, rectify the situation, hopefully without it coming to light.
That's kind of crazy to hear, especially with statistics and numbers that big. But I'm kind of confused. I thought that brands paid creators directly. So where is this discrepancy really coming from?
Yeah, so the discrepancy is that that actually isn't true. So if you're signed to an actual talent management agency, and by the way, let's pause here to kind of define our terms. So in the rest of the season, when we talk about agencies in our episodes, very often, most of the time, we're talking about influencer marketing agencies or PR agencies. So these are the agencies that work as the middleman. They work for the brand. So they're basically helping the brand manage marketing campaigns. So these agencies are hiring influencers, et cetera. In this particular episode, we'll kind of use the term manager and agency interchangeably, but what we're really referring to are talent management agencies. In other words, these are the people who sign on creators, and just like an actor or an athlete has an agent, same idea, right? So this agent is representing you. They are negotiating deals on your behalf. That's kind of how it is. So there are some sort of solo practitioner managers where you can hire just an individual and they will do some of this stuff for you. And for those types of individuals, they will be okay with you sort of doing your own invoicing and just paying them their fee afterwards. But for the most part, if you're signed to sort of like a quote unquote real agency, part of what the agency's value is doing all of the payment, collecting, invoicing, all of that stuff for you. So Basically what that means is no, the brand doesn't pay you directly. They pay your agency, and then the agency takes the money and they take their cut, their commission, which is typically 20%, it can vary, and then they hand you over the rest minus their commission. So that's how these kinds of scams can happen, because you don't have the direct financial relationship with the brand if you're signed to an agency.
So it's pretty much similar to like actors having agents. It's that same kind of like you're the talent and they're helping you find work.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what happens if an opportunity comes into your inbox directly? Do you still have to go through the brand, or is this kind of like you're working with them on the projects they get and you can kind of still work with stuff you find yourself?
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? If you're signed to an agency, typically it's going to be an exclusive relationship. And what that means is that even if it's an opportunity that the agency didn't generate for you, they didn't bring you the business, it just came to you directly because you're already known in the marketplace, it landed directly in your inbox, you still have to hand it over to the agency, have them negotiate it, and they still get that 20% cut. So, that's why this is such an important decision, because essentially you're handing over 1/5 of your brand deal business to your talent management agency.
So I know that, agencies can scam creators, or they might even be known to do that. But is that the only way that your money is really not safe?
We talked about these examples of like outright scams, right? And that's sort of one very extreme side of the spectrum. I think what you'll find much more common, extremely pervasive, literally every creator I've talked to who's been signed with an agency has run into the same issue, is that agencies play games with your payments. In other words, because they're the ones collecting the payment, you are relying on them to be honest about whether a project has been paid or not. So very often they will say, oh yeah, the brand hasn't paid yet, so that's why it's late. When actually the brand paid months ago and the agency just hasn't passed the money on to you. And, in my case, I was signed to an agency from like mid-2019 to mid-2020. And prior to signing with this agency, I obviously handled all of my campaign invoicing myself. And I had like a 90 to 95% on-time payment rate. So, obviously brands do pay late sometimes. That's not going to deny that happens. But my personal track record across, by that point, probably, close to 100 campaigns, is that for the most part, brands actually do pay on time, especially if you yourself are timely in invoicing and all of that stuff. Once I signed with this agency, the average campaign was paid 60 to 90 days late. So not just net 60, net 90, I'm talking about whatever the payment term was, then it took another 60 to 90 days. And, the agency wanted to make it seem like this was normal, like, oh, brands pay late. But it's like, well, if I had never negotiated my own deals, I would believe that. But because I had already done like over 100 deals, I knew that this was not normal. And unfortunately, that is extremely, extremely common. So just as an example, right, there's this creator that I'm friendly with. Let's call them M. And I saw that M had posted on their TikTok, and it was one of those like close friends only videos. And basically they were complaining about how brands are always paying late and this and that. And so I reached out to M and I was like, hey, just so you know, like from my experience, it's not really that brands pay late, but that agencies are playing games with your money. And so M and I had actually both done a campaign together. And so I was like, hey, by the way, that particular campaign that we both did, have you been paid for that yet? And M said, no, my agency said that the brand hasn't paid yet. And I told M, no, the brand not only paid on time, they paid early. So for 2 months, I had been paid, but the agency was hanging on to M's payment, pretending that the brand hadn't paid them yet. And so that's a perfect example of what happens. And, unfortunately, there's like no transparency, and you feel so vulnerable as a creator because like there's so little that you can do.
Honestly, that just sounds strange. Like you were paid and obviously the agency was just holding on to this creator's money. Do you know why this kind of thing happens? It just feels slimy.
I can only speculate because I have never run a talent management agency. But honestly, my suspicion is that they're just bad at managing cash flow. And that 20% that they make from their creators' campaigns is probably just not enough to cover their operational costs. So I think that at a lot of these agencies, there's some serious like Ponzi scheme level accounting going on where they're basically taking creator A's payment and hanging on to it. Then when creator B's payment comes in, they use that to pay creator A and so on and so forth. And sometimes it works, right? And then other times they get really backed up and all they do is like point fingers at the brand and say, well, they haven't paid us, so there's not much we can do.
So what can you kind of do to combat this? Like, could you go to the brand directly and be like, hey, did you just like happen to pay everyone yet?
Yeah, I mean, you can, right? But that's also tricky because sometimes, and I actually did this several times because there were brands where I'd already worked with them before I even signed to the agency. And so I had a good relationship with that client. So I felt comfortable enough to just be like, hey, I just want to verify that you haven't paid this yet because my agency is telling me that you haven't. And basically I caught my agency in lies like 2 to 3 times off of me actually just asking the client directly. But a lot of times creators don't feel comfortable asking. Sometimes it's because they literally don't have the contact for the brand, because if it's a deal that was completely negotiated through the agency, sometimes you don't even have that person's contact info at the brand, right? But I think a more like on a deeper level, sometimes you don't want to ask the client because it's embarrassing, right? Like you don't want to seem unsuccessful. You don't want to betray that there's like trouble in paradise. You don't want to seem like you're broke, like you really need the money. And so that's another reason why, even if you do have the contact of the brand, maybe you don't want to sort of betray that there's some trouble happening, because again, it's like, you're not sure how well that reflects on you. But I would say that if you do, as a creator, if you are experiencing this and you do have a relationship with the brand, ask the brand. Like I did that several times, and the client at the brand, they care about you. They don't care about the agency. So they're actually going to feel indignant on your behalf. They're not going to find it like, oh, wow, that's so embarrassing for you, Giovanna. Like you're so desperate and broke. They're not going to take it that way, even though we may feel that it comes across that way. They actually want what's in your best interest. They were happy with your work. They want to make sure that you're compensated. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. And I think, part of working with that agency is that they're managing that brand relationship. So it's good that if you are already established and you have worked with some of these brands, to not lose sight of all of the relationships that you've previously managed. So that way you can, hold your ground. And if something like this happens, you're able to kind of maintain that same, effect that you had before.
Yeah. So, clearly there can be a lot of issues when it comes to payments when you're working with agencies, whether they're just being a little shady with, passing payments on to you, or if they're outright scamming you, like the examples we talked about, at the top of the episode. And it's really for these reasons that so many creators are now becoming self-managed by choice. Even like prominent creators, big creators that you might be surprised aren't represented. It's not that they can't get represented. They're choosing to manage everything in-house because it's just that much safer. And that's something that I've chosen to do ever since I left my agency.
I feel like there's this conception that if you work with an agency, it just automatically equals more money. So do you feel like there was a big financial discrepancy between working with the agency and then going on your own?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a concern of mine, right? Because it can't be disputed that when you work with an agency, you have access to a pipeline of opportunities that are not already coming into your inbox. And so I was really concerned when I left the agency, like, is this a really bad mistake? Am I going to lose a ton of money? And the reality is that I actually doubled my gross the year after I left my agency. So just by myself, opportunities that were coming into me already that I did outreach for, I was able to actually double what I was making at the agency. And I just want to say also that the main reason I left my agency was this whole payments issue. If you actually do the math, overall, I actually did well at this agency. In other words, what I paid out in commissions versus the extra business that they brought to me, I very much profited from that. So in other words, for me, financially, it was actually a good move. What I could not tolerate as a total control freak was the lack of transparency around payments and just having no control over that process whatsoever. And so for me, I was like, even if I have to take a financial hit, right? Even if I make less, get fewer campaigns, I would rather make less money and not have to pay out the commissions and have full control over the payments process and the collections process, because that just, given my personality type, would just make me so much more at ease as a creator. So yeah, I just want, as a creator, if you are unhappy with your agency and you are considering maybe going off on your own, know that many, many, many creators are starting to do this. And this is something you can do. Like, I really want people to feel empowered and know that you don't have to rely on an agency. If you like your agency, stick with it. That's great. But yeah, you can absolutely do this on your own. You don't have to rely on an agency. You got this, guys. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about how to become a travel content creator like myself, I have a free masterclass that you can take. It's called How to Make It as a Travel Influencer Without Being Young, Hot, or Rich. You'll find this masterclass useful if you want to be a travel influencer, but you don't have the time or budget to travel frequently. You want to create travel content, but you worry that you don't have a background in photography or videography. You want to grow an audience, but you don't know how to attract the right followers and keep them engaged because you don't have much experience with social media. To sign up for this free masterclass, just visit travelinfluencerclass.com.
So a lot of people do work with agencies. Do you feel like this was an experience that just you have had, or is this common among other creators?
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely extremely common among creators. However, one thing that a lot of creators also don't realize is that not every creator at an agency on the roster is treated the same. So just as an example, so as we already established, I was dealing with rampant late payment issues with my agency, right? And so after I left, I was really friendly with one of the other creators who was on the roster. She had also left the agency. And we were talking afterwards about some of the issues that we had and why we left. And this other creator was shocked to learn that I was being paid late, because she had been with the agency for, I think, like 3 years. And she was like, I've never had a single late payment from them, ever. And she was literally like, could not believe what I dealt with. And it really made me realize that, one creator's experience at an agency is going to be completely different from another's. And what usually happens is that agencies play favorites, right? Sometimes it can just be like personality based, like they just like you better, so they're going to treat you better. But very often it's also a financially motivated thing where they're top earners, they're cash cows. They're going to make sure they bend over backwards, make sure that person is super happy, feels so taken care of. Every payment comes in on time. They negotiate every deal successfully, get them more money than they asked for, all of that. And while that person is sort of showered in amazing service, the other creators on the roster are going to be kind of left to languish, or they're sort of milked for their pipeline of opportunities, but they're not actually brought any business. And so it's so funny because I'm friendly with a pretty prominent YouTuber. She's been in the space for like 10, 15 years, started with a family channel. Now her daughters have their own very successful channel. The family has like multiple really successful like brand businesses. And she always told me, hey, if you're ever ready to, sign to an agency again, I'm happy to recommend you to ours. We're so happy with them, love them, they're amazing. And in the back of my mind, I was always like, well, if I ever don't want to do the self-managed thing again, if I am going to sign to an agency, I'll sign with hers, right? Come to find out, remember the creator M that we did the same campaign and they were paid super late? It's the same agency. So on the one hand, we have, let's call her Sarah, the prominent YouTuber. Sarah is raving about this agency, says they take care of her and her family, they're amazing. That same agency that's so stellar is screwing over this other creator by paying them late and lying to them and saying that the brand hasn't paid when clearly they paid months ago. So it just goes to show that even word of mouth referrals are not enough to protect you, right? Because you could be like, well, I'm only going to sign to an agency if other creators on that roster are really happy with them and they recommend me. It's not enough to protect you because not everyone is going to have the same experience.
Yeah, it's all kind of a popularity contest, and I guess you just don't want to be in the agency's burn book.
Yeah, I mean, it is a popularity contest to some extent, but I would also say that, systemic discrimination, unfortunately, also plays into it. You'll find that there's so many creators who get signed to talent management agencies, and they never get a single deal from that agency, like ever. And unfortunately, this is much more common if you belong to any kind of marginalized identity. So BIPOC, LGBTQ, plus size, hijab wearing, whatever is the sort of, differently abled, whatever kind of marginalized group you belong to, it is that much more likely that you will essentially get screwed over by a talent management agency. And especially after 2020, there was this sort of like great reckoning across many industries, same in the influencer marketing industry. And so many talent management agencies were sort of scrambling to diversify their roster, right? Because they looked at their roster and they're like, oh, every creator we have signed is like a blonde lady from Utah. Like we need to get, sort of different types of creators on the roster. And so there was a bit of like a mass scramble to sign up a bunch of diverse talent in that year. And unfortunately, a lot of those creators that got signed, they were literally just languishing on the roster for the next 12 to 24 months. So the agency got something out of it, right? Because they could be like, hey, look at our diverse roster. But then the creators actually didn't get anything out of the deal. And sometimes they actually did worse than when they were self-managing. And this kind of happened to me too. So the agency that I was signed with, my contract was up. And at the same time that my contract had expired, they actually got bought out by a bigger agency. So obviously this big agency acquired my agency with the thought that they would be getting all of the talent on the roster, but instead there was like a mass defection where everyone's like, well, I'm not going with this agency. So they were like scrambling to protect their investment. And so I was one of the creators that they were like desperately trying to woo over, but they knew it would be hard because my contract was already up. So I had no legal obligation to continue with them. And they were like trying really hard and like, oh, we value diversity and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, no, I'm just done with this agency stuff. I decided not to sign. And I'm so glad I didn't, because every single person I know that signed with them, particularly the BIPOC creators, never got a single deal from them ever. Like not one. So yeah, and that goes to show that getting signed to an agency, I think when you're a new creator, it just feels like the ultimate win. Like, oh, I've made it. It's like one of those big career milestones. But sometimes it can actually be a big mistake.
Yeah, an agency is supposed to be on your side. So you just really want to make sure that you vet them and that you're very conscious about bringing someone into your business, because it is your business. So you just want to do what is best for you.
Okay, so now I know that some of you are watching this or listening to this and thinking, well, Carmen, as you say in the intro of every episode, you're a small to medium-sized creator. And so that's probably why you're dealing with these issues, because you're dealing with these like subpar agencies who are maybe like less professional. No. Let me tell you, these issues that I'm talking about run the gamut all the way from like the most basic shady agencies at the bottom of the pyramid all the way to the top, like the super elite, like Hollywood type of agencies, the ones with the fancy 3-letter names, the ones that rep athletes, actors. A lot of them now are also in the influencer game. I hear these stories all across the board. And in fact, every time I talk about this issue of talent management agencies on my Instagram stories, because I'm probably one of the few people that openly talks about this because everyone else is like super embarrassed to. Every time I'll get DMs from people who are really prominent influencers, like to the point of like where they're almost more like public figures than influencers. And these are people that are signed to like, again, I don't want to name the names because I don't want to get in trouble, but all of those fancy Hollywood agencies with the 3-letter names. And they'll DM me and be like, oh my God, I am dealing with the same crap at my agency. And so this is rampant across the board. Unfortunately, like it's almost unavoidable. So please don't think that this is like only something that like peasants like me are dealing with. Like the royalty in the industry are dealing with the same issues. By the way, if you're finding this video useful, please hit the like button because it really does help us reach more creators just like you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.
So what is another misconception that people have about agencies?
So I think another misconception people have is that agencies are out there like doing all of this outbound pitching for you. And of course, when you when an agency is trying to sign you, they will tell you that they do that, right? I mean, my agency, you should have heard the presentation I got. It was like, we believe in 360-degree talent management. It's not just about brand deals. We're going to get into like publishing and products and TV. And in reality, obviously none of that happened. But yeah, I think most people imagine that you sign on to have a management agency and then they're going to be out there like, guys, everyone hire Giovanna. She's the best. Like, hey, we just signed Giovanna. Like, make sure you hire her. And in reality, very little of that happens. And if you are a talent manager, and I'm sure some of you are, feel free to, dispute this. And it's very possible that you actually do a lot of outbound pitching for your client, which is great. However, I will say that from all of the conversations I've had with many, many creators signed to many different agencies, all the way up the ladder of like prestige, what we have found time and time again is that agencies don't really do a whole lot of outbound pitching. And when an agency brings you a deal, what's actually happening is that they cross-sold you onto another creator's opportunity. So just to kind of like give you a more specific example, when I was signed to this agency, they did bring me quite a bit of business. So again, I made out pretty well while I was with them. But what I would realize is that all of the deals that they brought me, I would look at some of the other creators who were assigned to that roster and I'd realize, creator A did this deal last year. Creator B did that deal, the previous year as well. And so what really was happening is that brand was coming back saying, hey, we want to work with creator A again. We want to work with creator B again. And then my agency was cross-selling me onto that person's deal. So it's like, hey, definitely we can sign you up with creator A again. But we have this new creator, Carmen, who we think would be a great fit as well. So it's not so much that they pitched me to that brand, it's that the brand was coming to work with another creator on the roster and they just added me onto that campaign.
Kind of feels like you're getting invited to a birthday party just because your mom asked if you could go.
Yeah, I mean, so cross-selling is actually not a bad thing. I actually think it's an advantage to being part of a bigger roster of creators that you can kind of cross-pollinate these opportunities. So it's definitely a positive thing. What is sort of a danger, though, is that sometimes the original creator, where the brand came to me, Carmen, because they wanted to work with me, sometimes I can just get cut out of the deal altogether, where the agency is like, we know you like Carmen, she's great, but have you heard of Giovanna? She's up and coming, she's a star, she's amazing. You might really want to think about going with her instead, and we can get her for you at an amazing rate. Now, suddenly the brand is like, well, Carmen's old news. We want to work with Giovanna, especially since we can get her for half the price. And so, of course, that's not true in real life, guys. Giovanna knows how to charge her worth. So that's a real danger. And unfortunately, that is something that happens pretty often.
It doesn't sound great. How can you, avoid being cut out of the deal?
Yeah. So as you know, the name of this podcast is Small Steps, Big Moves. And the reason is we believe that sometimes it's the small details and the small tweaks that you make in your business that make the biggest difference. And so one small step I can share with our audience is if you are going to sign to an agency, very often they will say, hey, we've made an email address for you. That's Giovanna@talentmanagementagency.com. Please change the email in your bio on all of your socials and on your website to this. So then that way we can field all of your emails. Never do this. Never do this. Refuse to do it. And if they give you a hard time, they're not the right agency for you. What you should do instead is keep your same email address so you have access to your own inbox. And instead, as campaigns come in, as opportunities come in, forward them to your agency, and then they will negotiate for you. And the reason that you want to do this, there's actually two reasons. One, you need to be able to track what you're bringing in yourself versus what the agency is bringing you. And I know so many creators who just did this, right? They just handed over their whole email inbox to the agency. And so they have absolutely no idea what campaigns actually were generated by the agency versus what campaigns were already coming to them anyway, because they're known in the marketplace. And so if you can't track what the agency is bringing in versus what's already coming into you, you can't gauge the ROI that they brought, right? So, and of course, the agency doesn't want you to do that. That's why they want you to hand over your inbox. So that's, the first reason. But the second reason is that when you're able to forward emails on, what campaigns are coming into you, it makes it that much less likely that you're going to get cut out of the deal. It could still happen, right? If an agency is brazen enough, but you're going to catch it more often, right? Because if you get this opportunity, you pass it on to your agency, the agency's like, oh, it didn't work out, sorry. And then next thing you know, you see 3 other creators on the same roster as the agency are doing that deal that you generated, you're going to raise that question, right? But if your inbox is completely invisible to you, then the agency can do whatever they want with your opportunities. They could just pass them straight on to all of these other creators. And so sometimes the creators that get signed onto the rosters and they never get a single deal, it's because they handed over their entire inbox. So they don't even know what was already coming in. They don't know that their opportunities just got passed around to everybody else and they got cut out of the deal.
Yeah, you should remember that you're technically paying them. So you don't want to just start handing over large parts of your business, especially your email.
Yeah, your email is the lifeblood of your business. And all of the inbound opportunities are a result of what you did, not what the agency did, is the track record you've already established in the industry, the great content you make, the great sort of trust you have with your audience. That's a result of your hard work. And so you need to make sure that you maintain full control over that inbox.
So what if you didn't know this and your agency already has control of your inbox and all of a sudden emails are coming in, but they're not actually for brand deals. Maybe they're just for PR. What happens there? Does the agency start deleting them? Should you be managing them? It's kind of a sticky situation.
That's another danger in handing over your inbox, right? And actually the creator M that we talked about earlier, they did this. They handed over their inbox to the agency and they realized that there were all these requests from brands that wanted to send them free PR gifting opportunities. And the agency was just ignoring them. And yeah, an agency, obviously, they are only interested in paid opportunities because they can't get 20% off of a free box of makeup, right? We get it. But you also have to understand that beginning a relationship with a brand through PR gifting can eventually lead to paid opportunities down the line, right? So those requests shouldn't just be ignored. That's really bad business etiquette. And so M would find that these brands would be hitting them up via DM and saying hey, we emailed you a few times, offering you this gift. We just want to make sure that you're not interested. And M is what? I never heard about this. So yeah, that's sort of a third reason, I guess, not to hand over your email inbox is that there may be tons of opportunities in there for free gifting, free trips, free brand trips that are unpaid. The agency doesn't care. They're just going to ignore that email because there's no cash involved. But that could be a really valuable opportunity for you to make great content or start a relationship with a brand. And you don't even see it because it's just getting deleted.
It seems like there's some pros to cross-selling because you could end up with other campaigns or more opportunities that you might not have gotten otherwise. But are there any cons to it?
Yeah, the cons, in addition to getting cut out of the deal, like we talked about, I would say the other con, if an agency is cross-selling you or cross-selling other creators onto your opportunity, is that actually, one thing we didn't talk about is that sometimes in order for them to cross-sell other creators onto your opportunity, they're reducing your fee. So they're giving a group rate when really normally, let's say you could have commanded $10K for that campaign. They're like, hey, we'll drop Carmen's rate down to $8K if you also take on Giovanna on this deal. We'll give you a group discount. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is that sometimes agencies are so thirsty to cross-sell that they drag out the negotiation process. And when it's a time-sensitive project where the brand is like, listen, I just wanted to work with Carmen. Giovanna seems great, but we're in a rush. We just need to close this deal. But they're like, no, Giovanna is amazing. Please consider her. Da, da, da. They drag out the negotiation process. And then sometimes the creator loses the deal altogether because of that. And that actually happened to at least 2 campaigns I can think of when I first signed to this agency. These were campaigns that I had, which I shouldn't even have handed them over. That was stupid of me. I had already pretty much negotiated 80% of it. We'd agreed on a fee. Now it was just a matter of doing the paperwork. And the agency took over. And then I never heard about the deal again. I was like, what happened? And it wasn't until a year later that I caught up with the client and they were like, yeah, like they just dragged it out and we lost patience because we just wanted to work with you and they were just making us so complicated. So that's the disadvantage of cross-selling sometimes.
So I saw a TikTok the other day that was describing how you can actually sign with multiple agencies and end up with more opportunities. I was sort of confused. They talked about it like it was a good thing. Is this true? Is this something people do?
Yeah, so you sent me that TikTok and I was like, yeah, sounds good in theory. So basically this creator was like, hey, you don't have to only sign to one talent management agency. You can do non-exclusive relationships with multiple agencies, which sounds great in theory, right? But what you'll find in reality is that once you ask for a non-exclusive, that agency is going to ghost immediately. I can't tell you how many agencies are in my inbox like every single month. Every time I'm like, yeah, I'd be happy to work with you, but on a non-exclusive basis because we don't really need representation right now. We're doing just fine. Immediately, never hear from them again. And it makes no sense, right? Because you would think that like, being that we already have a great deal flow, we're already very in demand from brands, we have a healthy brand deals business, they could easily immediately make more money by cross-selling me onto whatever campaigns they're already working on with their other creators. Like it's an immediate win, right? And yet they don't want to do that. And the question is why? Well, because if they sign a non-exclusive with me, they don't get access to my inbox. They don't get access to my pipeline of opportunities, the opportunities I'm already generating myself. They can only cross-sell me or pitch me onto other things. So they can only eat what they kill, so to speak. And when an agency says, no, we don't want to do a non-exclusive, to me, it already shows that you value my pipeline of opportunities way more than valuing what I can bring to the brand deals you're already working on. And so it's already kind of like a recipe for failure. And so that tells me all I need to know. So yeah, in theory, you could sign on to multiple agencies. I think in reality, you'll find that very few agencies are willing to do that.
So you're saying that a lot of times they want this exclusivity so that way they can bottleneck deals that they might not even give to you?
Yeah, basically, right? Especially if you make the mistake of changing your email address to their email address so you don't even see the emails, that can happen. And so, yeah, a lot of agencies, they honestly, there are agencies out there are managers out there who have years of experience, who have a great Rolodex, they have great relationships with their clients, they have great insights into the industry, they can give you great strategic advice as a creator. Those exist. Hi to those. Keep doing what you're doing, you're amazing. However, I would say that those are the minority of talent managers or talent management agencies out there. There's a lot of agencies where you bring them more value than they can bring to you. Because think about it, like you can be a nobody, you sign an up-and-coming creator who is getting flooded in their inbox with tons of campaigns. You can build your entire business off of that one person, right? And really that one person didn't need that manager. If they could just like handle that themselves or hire someone internally to do that, they'd be just fine. But very often you'll find that it's the agencies that are getting more value from your pipeline of opportunities than you are getting from them.
Especially since, TikTok has been on the scene. I feel like there's a lot more agencies also getting tossed around.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that there are so many like fly-by-night agencies that just suddenly hung up a shingle and pretend that they know what the heck they're doing. And they look at all of these viral sort of overnight sensations that TikTok has produced, and they're like, I want to cash in. If I can sign a few of these, take that 20% of each, I'm going to be rich, right? And unfortunately, there's so many of these agencies that have no idea what they're doing. They have no industry experience. They have no understanding of market rates. And just one great example of this is there's a travel creator that I mentored, and they had kind of like, fairly small size audience, but their content was good. And, they told me their rates. And I was like, listen, you guys really need to up your rates because even at the smaller size, like you're not charging enough. Now, fast forward a few months, they had a few videos go mega viral. Their audience grew by like 10 to 20x. They get signed by one of these fly-by-night scammy agencies. Guess what? They didn't change their rates. Their rates are still the same as like when I was advising them. This agency was like, you need to lower your rates. So their rates were already low at their previous audience size. Now their audience size is like 10 to 20x bigger. And this agency is like, you're charging too much, which makes no sense, right? And then also, like, to me, I was like, wait, if you're a commission-based business, why would you want to charge less? Then you get paid less as well. So to me, I was like, there's an immediate scam here. Like, something is really fishy. Like, you need to just get out of this relationship. But unfortunately, there's so many stories like that. So you really have to protect yourself and understand that, like, just because someone says they're an agency and they've managed to like convince a few creators to join them, it doesn't mean that they actually know what they're doing.
Yeah. You know, the point of an agency is to make more money. So you want to make sure that you're also raising your rate in an appropriate way. If your content grows, you grow, just like over time in general. So that is such a, red flag, slimy thing to hear. But you definitely want to make sure that you're conscious of this and that you're growing and that the agency wants you to grow.
Okay, so another small step tip for our audience. If you are going to sign to an agency, it's most likely going to be an exclusive contract. It's hard to come by the non-exclusive ones, as we've established. I would say make sure at the very least you have some kind of a 3-month clause where you can cancel within the 3 months with no penalty. Essentially, you want to have like a 3-month trial period where you get a chance to work with this agency and see if it's a fit. And that way you can cancel, after the 3 months if you don't really feel like it's working out. Sounds good in theory, right? I mean, at least put it in, it's helpful. But sometimes like the real issues don't really come out till like 6 to 9 months in, because that's when the payments start rolling in or not rolling in, as is really the case. But at the very least, to protect yourself, put in that 3-month clause. Another thing I would say is see if you can push for a 6-month contract rather than the standard 12-month contract, because 12 months is just a long time to get locked in. Let's say you go through the 3-month trial period. You're like, everything seems fine. Then you hit month 6 and it's like, oh, they're not handing me my payments. Like suddenly, magically, every brand is paying late. And then now you have another 6 months that you're stuck with this agency for, right? So if you can at all, if it's at all possible, I would say push for a 6-month contract. And then another thing I would say is make sure the contract does not auto-renew. A lot of agencies will slip this in so that it's like they're banking on you forgetting when your contract is up. So let's say your contract is up December 1st. It will auto-renew December 2nd, unless you give them 30 days written notice, right? So make sure there is no auto-renew clause in that contract. Make sure if it's there, make sure you take it out.
Yeah, when you get those contracts, redline the crap out of them.
Exactly.
It's your business, your image, you call the shots.
Yeah, remember, everything is negotiable. Don't feel like, oh my God, I'm just a nobody, but they want to sign me. No. They're getting way more out of the relationship than you're getting out of it, trust me. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, push for what you need. Another thing you should really think about is definitely hire a lawyer to review that contract. With brand deals, it's not always necessary. I mean, ideally, every brand deal contract would be reviewed by a lawyer, but realistically, we don't all have that kind of budget, right? But if there's one time you really need to invest in hiring a lawyer, it's to review a talent management agency contract, because it's a long-term contract and there could be all kinds of things in there that keep you stuck, that make you not be able to leave. And it's sort of like your business is being held hostage until you can get out. So you don't want to be in that situation. So if there's ever a time to hire a lawyer, this is the time.
Do you feel like, aside from agencies bringing you more money and having some potentially positive effects, is that something that creators just can't do on their own? Do they have value?
Look, I mean, managers and agents who are really good at what they do that's very valuable. Let's not pretend that it's not. But I also don't want creators to be gaslit into thinking that these talent management agencies have some specialized skill set that nobody else has. It's not like Jerry Maguire, where it's like, show me the money, and you're doing these or writing a number on a piece of paper and sliding it silently across a table. There are not these hard-nosed negotiation tactics that are super complex. Literally negotiating brand deals, it's answering emails. That's it. Like these talent managers, all they're doing is just responding to incoming inquiries and establishing the scope and quoting a fee. And then maybe we go back and forth a little bit and it's more emails. Like that's it. This is something that any creator can do themselves. It's not some hugely specialized skill. It's not that complicated. It's not rocket science. Anybody can do this with just a little bit of training. And it's all like very template driven. Like all of these brand deal negotiations really follow the same like 3 to 4 steps. And so I run a multiple 6-figure brand deal business literally off of like 3 Gmail canned responses. Like it's all template driven. So that also means that it's super easy for you to just hire someone yourself and plug them into that role and just train them on which templates to use to respond to which kinds of emails. So you don't even need to have an agency. And I think this is something that a lot of creators haven't thought of. Having an agency or having a manager is not the only option. You can just hire a competent like virtual assistant. Like I have one part-time virtual assistant who helps me with this stuff. It's just template driven. You train them and it's not that complicated.
I also feel like this can lead to a more fulfilling career because if you're able to retain that control in a healthy way, then you can, have your business grow how you want it to. And you won't really have a money-driven agency kind of controlling a lot of that growth.
Yeah. And I also think that at the end of the day, nobody can sell you as well as you can sell yourself. Because what you'll often find, a lot of the frustration that creators I know have had with their agencies is that the agencies don't know how to sell them to the client because the agencies very often are only stuck in this mindset where, for example, they know that brands really like bachelorette contestants who push a lot of like, LTK, like to know it, swipe up commission-based deals, right? And so they only see value in those very specific things where it's like, oh, but she has an amazing click rate on her Instagram story links. Like she generates tons of commissions and sales. And it's like, that's just an example, but it's like you may not be a shopping influencer. And so that's not really the skill set that you bring. But because the agency only knows how to work with that specific type of creator, they don't know how to position you to a client. They don't know how to position your value. And that's something that you're worth the best. The brands that have worked with you that have gotten the most value, what it was about you that they liked. You know how to verbalize that and show the value of that to other brands. And very often, talent managers don't know how to do that because, again, they only know how to do that very cookie cutter, like reality show contestant, mommy vlogger, like that type of deal. They don't know how to sell someone who maybe is like a little bit more complex.
So I think we've decided we're just not signing with agencies.
So I know I've spent the whole episode like bagging on agencies, and that's not to say that no creators should ever sign with an agency. The thing is like when an agency does what it's supposed to do, it's a beautiful thing, right? Because it takes so much work off of your plate as a creator. You have so much less admin. There's so much less back and forth in emails, invoicing, like all of that is taken off your plate immediately, like instantly. And it's amazing. So if you're lucky enough to be one of those like cash cows on the roster, the sort of golden girl that they're really treating really well, you're going to have an amazing experience. You're going to love having an agency. Unfortunately, many agencies do not do what they're supposed to do. They don't handle business. They don't pitch you the right way. They don't pay you on time. And so for a lot of creators, their experience in working with an agency is subpar. And unfortunately, that's very, very, very common. And I think more creators need to know that there are serious risks in signing to an agency. And I think at the end of the day, for me, it's only worth signing to an agency if they can bring in much bigger deals than you're already generating yourself. All of the agencies that are hitting me up are kind of just wanting to bring me more of what I already have. And to me, it's like, well, if we're already generating like low to mid 5-figure deals consistently, you just want to still be playing in that same sandbox. I don't really care about that. I'm not going to hand over 1/5 of my business so that you can do what I'm already doing, right? But if I can find an agency that's going to bring those high 5-figure, even 6-figure deals, then it becomes worth it. And I think, as a creator, you want to think about that yourself. Like if you're already doing pretty well and an agency is just going to just answer the emails for you for what you're already doing, I don't know if it's worth the risk of handing over 1/5 of your business just for that. And another thing is that very often when I talk to these agencies about my rates, they're actually like, oh, you charge that much? Like this one agency that hit me up recently, and they came highly recommended by a couple creators that I know. So I was like, all right, I'll have the conversation. And I was telling this agency, I was like, yeah, the first half of 2023 was pretty soft. So this was the revenue we made. And they were like, wow, for you, that was a soft first half? And I'm just like, quack, quack.
Delete.
So I'm like, okay, well, it seems like I'm doing better than you could have done for me. So I don't think we need to continue this conversation. So yeah, you'd be surprised. Like, don't assume that an agency can bring in more business than you can do yourself. It's just not always the case.
So I know that you know yourself, well, and that, you know your business and your content, but I feel like we all kind of know someone who maybe identifies as a creator or an artist or, is just in a space where they are hands-on with their work. And they also maybe aren't feeling as confident in getting that business themselves or like managing their finances or doing a lot of what an agency does, because those are different hats that you wear. So wouldn't an agency be really attractive for someone like that to kind of give that control so they can focus on what got them into this business in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that type of creator who's like, I'm an artist, I'm a creative, like I don't want to deal with money. And, if you identify as that type, just know that unfortunately in this profession, not dealing with money and not dealing with business is not an option. So even if you sign to an agency, they work for you. You still need to manage them. You can't just expect to like hand it off and assume everything's going to be all good, because guess what? If you're hands off and they know you're not paying attention, as we talked about, not everyone on the roster is treated equally. Guess who's going to get exploited first? It's not going to be Carmen, who's always asking where her money is. It's going to be you, right? And so I think that's something you really need to take into account, is that there is never such a thing as just handing your business off to a third party. You have to stay involved. It's ultimately your responsibility, and you have to keep an eye on everything because it's too easy for creators to get exploited. It happens all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a business and it's your business. So when you hire an agency, you're hiring them. You're essentially buying into a team of people that are supposed to help you. And so if you don't work with that team anymore, your business doesn't disappear. You still own the business. So the success is still going to come back to you and about how you work with the agency and about the work that you put into it. Because like you were saying, don't get into this business if you don't want to deal with money at least a little bit, because it's a business and businesses, need money in order to succeed.
Exactly. And I think it's your responsibility as a creator to develop some of those rudimentary business skills, negotiation skills, knowing how brand deals are structured so that you know the basics of how to do it. Because another thing that a lot of creators don't think about is, what if your agency drops you? Right? Suddenly you have no representation. You're by yourself. And actually I have a friend who's in this exact position. And even though she's a veteran, she's been doing it for years, she never handled her own brand deals. She always had her agency do everything for her. And now she's back to square one, literally learning from scratch all the stuff that we've talked about in the season of this podcast. And so no matter what, it's your responsibility as a creator, as someone who's running your own business, to learn these basics. You don't have to be the best in the world at it, but you need to at least know some of the fundamentals. A, to manage the agency, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. And then B, in the event that you no longer have representation, business doesn't stop, right? You're not going to just like not do brand deals for 6 months until someone else picks you up. Like, you have to know how to do this yourself. So yes, outsourcing, delegating is great. It can free you up to be more creative. You can't afford to just take your eye off the ball completely. It's still your responsibility. It's your career. It's your business at the end of the day.
If you get dropped, it's the same thing as getting laid off from a corporate company. Like, you're back out in the game by yourself. So you just want to protect yourself, protect your business. You've worked for all of this. So don't forget that.
Doing brand deals as a creator can be extremely lucrative, but it's also easy to completely blow it and jeopardize your future opportunities. And there's one absolutely critical mistake you need to avoid. So check out this video where I show you what it is and why getting it wrong can be so devastating. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you over there.